It feels like it's been way too long since we last got a new entry in the Sims series. I distinctly remember growing up playing the earlier titles all the time, and it's just the type of game that pretty much anyone can enjoy and have fun with. But for those that bought The Sims 2 for the Nintendo DS, they had a huge surprise in store waiting for them. Because this version of The Sims was unlike any other made before or any made since, focusing less on living life in a suburban household and more on one of the most drug-induced and wacky adventures of a lifetime, with a grand mystery looming over its creation. You see, in The Sims 2 DS, you start the game as a random sim who has been assigned as the new manager at a creepy hotel in a deserted area known as Strangetown. When you first arrive, your initial task is to find a literal nuclear fuel rod sitting just outside in the sand to power a generator in the basement, and things only start to get more unbelievable after this. You are introduced to a host of strange and peculiar people that almost make it seem like you are living out a dream, and eventually you are shown to your room, which is composed of psychedelic colors and a random stage platform in the middle of your living room, which makes no sense, along with demonic worshipping symbolism everywhere. And just when you thought things couldn't get any weirder, suddenly aliens invade the hotel after you have scraped poop off the bathroom toilets, and all hell breaks loose. The mafia and demonic cults start to get involved, and part of the main story is about teaching kids how gambling is a great way to make money, all while you have to engage in subtle human sacrifice trials and drug-induced benders that see you diving into the lore of Strangetown and its unnerving people. And truthfully, it's just one of the most insane and mentally deranged games out there, with so many subtle, violent, and sadistic themes that have no place in a game primarily made for kids. So it starts to make you wonder, how on earth did this game get approved? The Sims 2 DS pushed this envelope to levels never seen before, and considering EA themselves was watching over the development, it's absurd to think this even got approved. In fact, the original pitches for the game were even wilder than what we actually got, with the creators begging EA to allow them to make the story from the first-person perspective of a parasitic amoeba that controlled the brain of a host sim that you could then secretly murder people with and eat their organs. It's such a preposterous premise that it almost sounds fake or like some creepypasta that someone made up on the internet, but no, this game actually exists. And there are multiple moments throughout the story full of dark themes, as well as mummified human beings being held captive, people that are trying to set houses or different rooms on fire to get back at adversaries, or countless random events like an interdimensional robot who storms into the building out of nowhere with no explanation for no reason and starts asking to clean things up. Essentially, it's like playing The Sims, but if you decided to take a megadose of LSD beforehand and had no one to help you. And when you combine this with some truly dark and brutal moments, you start to realize why so many young kids reported being psychologically damaged by this title at the time. I mean, seriously, imagine being an 8-year-old who played The Sims 2 on PC and decided to pick up the DS version, only to find yourself being asked by the mob to bury a wriggling suitcase in the desert and never speak about it again. So the big unanswered mystery then is clearly, how did this title even get greenlit and released by EA, one of the biggest video game publishers in the world with a lot to lose, especially when it was attached to such a beloved franchise that was associated with families and children. It's practically a lawsuit and controversy waiting to happen. But then again, The Sims has always been known for strange and wacky things, but never anything to this extent that's so violent and deranged. And when you combine this with a lot of mystery surrounding the actual development of this title and how it even came to be, it makes you think about how this all even happened in the first place. The story of Polybius is one of the most well-known unsolved mysteries in gaming history, that to this day has not gotten any actual final and definitive solution. As the myth goes, back in Portland, Oregon in November of 1981, a new and unassuming black box arcade machine was secretly introduced into some local arcades in the area. Called Polybius, it was said to have a strange sequence of numbers and letters that would play on screen, with fast-paced flashing lights you would fly through in a blaze of glory. But the even more sinister and mysterious part about it was that the arcade machine would apparently give anyone that played it an extreme addiction that would lead to bouts of nausea, vomiting, and even self-harm tendencies. And to only add to the oddity, there were multiple reports that shadowy men in black suits and government agents would periodically come into the arcades and secretly take the Polybius machines away, apparently for further analysis. Or in other words, the urban legend postulates that the US government had actually created a new harmful arcade machine in the 80s, which was secretly being planted in Portland arcades in order to try and run some sort of study on innocent children and players. And as we know, around this same time in the 70s in the US, the government had actually done something similar, which we've learned about in declassified documents of MKUltra, where it's been proven that the US government did at one point inject unwitting and innocent US citizens with harmful hallucinogenic drugs and contagions in order to study their effects, and in a bid to see if they could find a serum for true mind control. So considering this is a confirmed and real thing, imagining that FBI agents would try to run a similar test using arcade machines isn't so far-fetched after all. In fact, in the 1980s, there were actually multiple reports of children and adults getting sick playing games for too long in Portland. And also, local police stations and FBI did actually raid Portland arcades around the same time as the Polybius rumor, but for concerns about illicit drug use and selling, not because they were doing underground testing, at least as far as we know. So it's not hard to see why people would believe the story of Polybius though. However, there's never been any actual first-hand proof that the mysterious arcade box ever existed. We do know that Portland at the time was a hotbed area for new game creators to test out their latest arcade boxes, with many arcades having multiple black box machines that were not seen anywhere else and quickly disappeared. But most of these have been documented and proven, which is not the case for Polybius. The most likely explanation then is that an aspiring writer or jokester like Kevin Mannis, one of the assumed creators of the Polybius story, saw an opportunity with all of the hysteria to make a fun urban legend that would get people to freak out. It was believable enough considering the state of Portland arcades at the time, along with a general distrust of the populace towards their own government in the 80s. However, there have been some individuals that have come out and claimed to have actually worked on the arcade game itself, stating that it was a top secret government project that they were told very little about. But none of these apparent game developers or people involved with the Polybius project have been able to actually provide any definitive proof or statements. Meaning where we stand now is at the corner of a story that is likely nothing but a hoax, which originated from a post on a fringe website years ago called coinop.org, likely where the original writer of the story tried to create a fake narrative for their own amusement, which eventually got picked up years later by gaming publications, which made it go mainstream. Or we could also be seeing the remnants of a government mind control conspiracy that almost was conducted undetected, but was unearthed by some sleuthing and is now trying to be obfuscated by FBI agents in order to make it seem fake. Probably not that, but considering that the US government and also almost every government on the planet has at one point had documented and now unclassified evidence of killing or planning to kill and harm their own citizens for their own sick gain, maybe believing something like Polybius is too far-fetched to actually be real is the real conspiracy theory. The loss of a loved one is one of the most tragic things we can experience in life, and that tragedy only gets amplified tenfold when it relates to the casualty of a child. So in the 1990s, when supposedly nearly 200 children took their lives in a short period of time in Japan, there was rightfully cause for mass concern and hysteria. But strangely, one of the main culprits behind this phenomenon actually turned out to be the last thing you think would be harming children: Pokemon. Just before many of the tragedies started to occur, the Pokemon Company had released their latest game, the famous Pokemon Red and Blue series. It's actually the first one I played as a kid, so this one really hits home. But apparently, there was one specific level in the game that was quite literally making children go insane. You see, in Red and Blue, at one point during the main story, you make your way to a place called Lavender Town. It's one of the only locations in the entire game series that isn't home to a special trainer gym you need to beat, and that's because in its place is a massive and foreboding megastructure known as the Pokemon Tower. Inside the tower lies a wasteland filled to the brim with death and decay. Beneath the floorboards and in a series of mummified tombs lie the lifeless bodies of Pokemon sent to their doom. And on each floor are tons of ghost-type Pokemon that still haunt the halls, along with one specific demon Pokemon that is wreaking havoc. And on top of this, when you first arrive, you will find countless trainers crying and mourning the loss of their dead best friends, along with others who have seemingly lost their minds and turned feral that you must fend off. And as as if it couldn't get any worse, as you make your way through the tower, you are accompanied by never-ending and unsettling music that gets creepier and creepier the more you listen. It's far and away the darkest and most sinister place we've seen in Pokemon history, and considering that this is a game made for kids, it's frightening just how horrifying this place really is, and it shows why so many people believed it to be haunted in real life too. Because during this time of mass hysteria in Japan due to the loss of so many children, many parents were said to have been making accusations that this specific level had been the culprit. Apparently, there were hidden high-pitched frequencies in the music that only children's eardrums could pick up on that were specifically designed to induce crippling paranoia and bouts of depression. And on top of this, reports came out that some of the light strobing in this level was also designed around specific photon receptors in eyes that are more capable to be seen as children that we lose over time, which would flash images of death and sadness to children while they played. Or in other words, the idea was that developers of the most recent Pokemon game had deliberately crafted an experience that would be deadly to children while remaining undetected for adults. Truthfully, it's one of the most absurd accusations I've heard of in a while, but where things start to get really crazy is when you find out why they weren't actually all that unfounded. Around the same time of this incident, the Pokemon series had released a new episode of the anime TV show which included two highly controversial animation techniques known as Paka Paka and Flash in Japan. Both of these techniques combined fast-paced high-frequency lights emitting consistently with a flush of colors all over, and these deadly combinations literally induced seizures and vomiting in over 100 verified reported cases in Japan. So as outlandish and paranoid as the initial Lavender Town Syndrome reports seem, there was actual first-hand evidence that the Pokemon Company could in fact harm children using cute Pokemon. To this day though, there's never been any actual proof that the Lavender Town Syndrome exists, and considering things like the language barrier between Japan and the United States where most people talk about this, it's easy to see how things might have been blown out of proportion. I will say though that after listening to the song used in this level along with watching a lot of footage, it really does give off a creepy vibe. But I wouldn't say I feel especially depressed, I just have a big headache. And by the way, for anyone watching this, you've actually been listening to the music and watching the footage for some time now, so let me know down below if you're feeling anything weird. And if you aren't, it could be because of rumors that only certain cartridges of Pokemon Red and Blue were actually designed to kill, and only a couple of these crazy copies are left in the wild for us to one day discover the truth. So could the Pokemon Company actually be a sadistic cult of child killers that are systematically trying to take over the world one child tragedy at a time? No, but it's fun to think so. The Stanley Parable is one of the most unique and uncanny experiences in games, full stop. You play as a man named Stanley, trapped in the never-ending liminal spaces of your office building, alone and afraid. And as you make your way through this facility, an optimistic and friendly British voice leads you along, telling the story of one man named Stanley and the journey he goes on.
Stanley took the first open door on his left. Stanley was so bad at following directions, it's incredible he wasn't fired years ago. But in his eagerness to prove that he is in control of the story and no one gets to tell him what to do, Stanley leapt from the platform and plunged to his death.
It's a title full of jokes, sarcasm, and dark humor. And as a kid, I remember playing the original after listening to Total Biscuit talk about it, and I instantly fell in love with the series. But maybe the biggest reason for that was that behind the game's creepy facade lies even stranger and more haunting mysteries, maybe none of which are more fascinating than the Watching Man. Seen only under very specific conditions like the no buckets ending or after restarting your game multiple times, this strange figure lies just out of reach and is also the only other human being you ever see. The first time you encounter this stranger is when walking past one of the work cubicles right at the start of the game. If you look directly to your right after entering the second office unit, you will for a brief moment see a man through a window walking slowly in the other room. The reason this stands out so much though is that Stanley is supposed to be the only person left alive in the building. Even the narrator himself makes reference to this multiple times. But clearly, someone or something else is inside this building with you. If you make your way over to a computer with all employee records, while scanning through the database, the security system notes that there actually are two people in the office, one being you, Stanley, and the other an unidentified entity. So it seems clear then that there really might be someone else inside this hellish building with you. But the question then becomes, who is this man? Some in the community have begun to speculate speculate that this mystery man may actually be none other than Employee 432, who based on in-game files we can find was a top-secret test subject undergoing mind control trials that seem to have gone wrong. In the mind control facility chambers, we can even find a report that notes that Employee 432 at one point asked Employee 431 for a pencil, and if we investigate the area, we discover a huge box labeled 432 that is stuffed to the brim with pencil sharpeners. The truly horrifying part, though, is that after discovering this box, if we leave and then come back, it disappears. Someone must have moved that box, and considering the only living beings inside these walls are you and this watching man, he seems to be the most likely culprit for who Employee 432 is. On top of this, there are multiple very short windows in which we can see the man standing on ledges or in rooms far away for a split second, watching you as you go through the facility. And even in one of the original Stanley Parable Deluxe Edition trailers, we can see the man for a half second behind one of the doors the player is looking at. So who exactly is this watching man then? He clearly has extensive access to the office and its inner workings, even more so than us, and has even managed to evade the watchful eye of our omnipotent and omniscient narrator for most of this time, except for one instance where when you restart the game, the narrator does make the haunting revelation that we're no longer alone. And on top of this, his outfit just doesn't seem to fit the location. If this man was our boss, you would expect to see him in a suit, and if he was a co-worker, he would be wearing a company-assigned ensemble like Stanley. Well, if we look into the game files on this strange man specifically, things only get weirder, because in the game files, the watching man is actually referred to as A-Man 0002, which after more extensive research actually is a shorthand designator for Airport Man version 2. But what on earth does an airport man have anything to do with the Stanley Parable? Well, some of the new content in the Deluxe Edition actually sees us going outside of the facility for the first time, at least from our vantage point, which might imply that there's also a lot more going on at this place than we originally thought, where potentially the airport man could be some sort of Illuminati or godlike figure behind the scenes pulling the strings outside in the real world while keeping us inside trapped like a mouse in a cage. Probably my favorite part about watching speedruns in games is listening to explanations on how different exploits or speed-ups were found, and deep dives into the code and architecture behind some of the biggest titles and devices that show how resourceful the speedrunning community really is. And within this sect of gamers, maybe no game is more ubiquitous than Super Mario 64, which coincidentally is also home to some of the biggest mysteries in speedrunning history, of which one of the coolest is an upwarp that happened back in 2013. For those of you that don't know, in Mario 64, speedrunners commonly use a tactic called upwarping, which allows them to quickly traverse to higher points on the map without much effort. Usually, in order to pull this maneuver off, a player must perfectly propel themselves into a direct angle in a ceiling that is sitting under another hangable ceiling, and if they hit the lower ceiling just right, Mario will instantly teleport or upwarp onto the hangable ledge above. It's just one of many tactics that speedrunners use to save time, but the thing about it is it's only supposed to happen under those specific conditions. Well, that is unless you're one speedrunner known as Dota Teabag, who over a decade ago in September of 2013 kicked off a series of events that would light the speedrunning community on fire. You see, back in 2013, Dota Teabag and his buddy were streaming a competition of sorts to see who could hit the better speedrun on that day. But partway through, the now infamous incident occurred. Out of nowhere, while jumping in no man's land, and just as he hit the bottom of a platform, Dota Teabag was instantly upwarped directly above himself with no effort at all. A clip was made of the incident immediately, and Dota Teabag and others were suspicious of what even just happened. But for years, the clip sat with almost no views or attention, and it seemed as if this strange upwarp would simply be forgotten to time. That was until in 2015 when one popular speedrunning streamer stumbled upon the Twitch clip, and without second thought started to get the word out about this insane event that had no explanation. In no time, bounties worth over $1,000 were being put up online for someone to solve the mystery, with many people giving it a shot but to no avail. In some YouTube comments on a popular video about the incident though, some people came up with an absolutely insane explanation. Potentially, the random upwarp could have been the cause of a bit flip. You see, bit flips have been known to happen from time to time in the speedrunning community, and in this case, the assumption was that maybe the bit for Mario's height in memory at the exact moment had been flipped, causing his vertical position in 3D space to immediately alter itself, resulting in the upwarp. In fact, some investigators were even able to test this theory, and created clips that looked almost identical to what happened with Dota Teabag at the exact same spot. The problem was though, if it was just a bit flip, then what caused it? Well, once again, the YouTube comment section had a crackpot theory. Maybe the bit flip had been the result of some sort of ionized particle radiation interference. After all, ionized particles have been shown to flip bits in computer systems before, but that would mean that quite literally a cosmic ray from the sun would have had to have penetrated the Earth's atmosphere and assaulted Dota Teabag's Nintendo 64 at the exact time of the stream, which without a doubt is one of the craziest theories out there, but no one had any better ideas. And so the mystery of this strange event only grew, with one investigator even buying Dota Teabag's Nintendo 64 and Mario cartridge after he explained that he even had hardware issues at the time. But after deep investigation into the internal hardware, nothing strange came up. Many in the community though even speculated that maybe the upwarp could have been the result of faulty bin connections between the cartridge and N64, or maybe that the glitch had been the result of a cart slap, where players hitting their own consoles during gameplay can shift pins or bits in memory that will cause strange things to happen in game, something with documented proof of happening before. But even now, over a decade later, we still don't know exactly what happened on that fateful day in 2013. Maybe the glitch wasn't even caused by a bit flip in the first place, or even a hardware malfunction due to electromagnetic interference, for instance, but rather some sort of mechanism in the game itself that no one's been able to replicate so far. After all, we do have some specific instances in other places of strange things happening in-game that later are revealed to be tricks that anyone can use. It's one of the reasons people look into things like this so much in the speedrunning community. It's how you start improving times even years later. Regardless though, the Cosmic Ray speedrun is a perfect example of what makes the speedrunning community itself so fascinating. Peculiar events and intriguing mysteries full of crazy storylines and investigations, all with the potential to discover new tricks that can once again allow players to beat records previously thought unstoppable.